So now we're going to go to our last panel, which very difficult because they stand between us and happy hour. Or the networking event, as others call it. All right. Are you guys good to go? Okay, great. Well, here we go. Let's close the day with an important conversation on ethics and social responsibility in supply chains, moderated by Dr. Grace Sosik. Please welcome them up.
Hello? Is this working? I don't. Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see that there is still so many faces here. I want to be like the airlines to say, we know you guys have a lot of options, and thank you for choosing us. I know there is a bar downstairs, and it's great that you prefer to stay with us than going downstairs. We have a great panel here today. And when I was looking a little bit at composition of the panelists and speakers today, it was about 1/3 female, and our panel is actually 2/3 female. So it has the most female representation, and it has a lot of diverse people from very different backgrounds. So we have Nicole Mau here, coming to us from Germany. So she's a professor, a co-founder of Mau Analytics. We have Steve Robinson, who is currently founder and CEO of the supplychainproject.org, but had a lot of previous lives and previous hats, and I think he will use some of those to discuss with us today. Andrea Darmes, currently at Maersk, head of standardization and upskilling, but actually one of the early graduates of Marshall Supply Chain Management Master's Program and one of my former students. We have Alessandra De Sousa, Director of Global Procurement at Chipotle, and also being in food industry for some time, and also an undergraduate from our programs. And last but not least, Rich Rizzardi, CEO of Innoware, and being involved in fundraising and many of the nonprofits helping these types of companies. So I've been part of the Supply Chain Summit for, I think, since the beginning, and the last several years I've been involved with moderating sustainability-related panels. And it feels like this year, with all these things happening with supply chains, that sustainability may not be as relevant as it used to, but it still becomes a big problem that we have to deal with and that we have to face. And what we chose this year as the theme is kind of, yes, it's okay to talk about what we need to do in sustainability, and the ideas are always great, but once we want to try to implement them, typically there are a lot of issues that come up, and the companies have to figure out how to deal with those. So we kind of looked at several different questions, topics that are related to implementation of sustainability issues, and hopefully, you will find the discussion and comments from our panel insightful and interesting. So the first topic we wanted to look at is how to move from ESG strategy to practical execution in complex environments. And we have here two people who had experience in food industry, and food industry can be quite a sensitive one because you really have to be careful about where your ingredients are coming from. They can have big impact on your customers' health and so on. And it can be especially difficult to implement them when there is either no legal requirements or too many legal requirements. So we sometimes say how it's great that Europe has so many laws helping in sustainability, but we will also hear now firsthand how some of these laws can actually make it much more difficult to implement sustainability. So, Nicole.
Yes. Hello. I'm very happy to be here again on stage. So talking about the European regulations, there are so many regulations. One of the most important parts is the European Deforestation Regulation, which is it affects 7 different product categories. So where you have to have geolocalization. Upcoming for the next year is the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive. We have the PPWR, the Paper and Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. So there are so many regulations that in the end companies cannot be creative. Companies cannot have a USP in being environmental friendly and being sustainable because you're just following the regulations. And of course, with some examples, nobody's paying the cost. So when you start with these regulations, first of all, you need to ask yourself is like, what is the benefit? And who's benefiting from it? Is it the customer? Is it the company? Are you saving money? So all of these questions with a lot of the regulations cannot be answered positively because you're really just busy creating volumes of data. And we will talk about, hear from Steve, something about that later. So I have an example with me, and I don't know if anybody of you has been in the European Union in the last years. Exactly, someone is showing it. So I brought, especially for you, I brought a bottle from Europe, and you cannot get rid of the lid. So it's stuck to the bottle. Someone liked it, being in Europe, because he could refill his bottle and not lose the cap. But for everybody else, it's just annoying. And the next thing is, would you pay for that? No, of course not. So, and the company, the changing the machines so that they are able to do that was 500,000 euros. Right now, I think it's about $550,000 per machine. But you don't earn a single cent more. So a lot of these costs, the companies have to cover a lot of these costs, especially when we talk about the food industry, talking about, summarizing all the data, collecting the data, but there is no, in this case, no added benefit for the companies and also not obviously for the consumer.
Yeah, just to add, so as we think about legislation in Chipotle, right? So over 30 years ago, when Steve Ells, our founder, set up our purpose, we had like 3 to 4 restaurants, little scale. And he said, look, the purpose of supply chain is to source ingredients and everything they can responsibly, right? So what does that mean, right? So along the years, everyone started translating what does that mean? And we came up with the Food with Integrity standards. And really, it's to source high quality ingredients with respect for the animals, the community, and the people that we work with, right? So as we gain scale from 3 restaurants to 1,000 to 2,000, now we're close to 4,000, right? Having some specific specs such as, right? I'll give you some examples. Our meat and dairy, we don't use antibiotics. We don't use hormones. We don't on our ingredients, they are GMO free, right? So when you think about scaling this, it was so challenging. So I feel like just kind of to go back to the legislation and restriction, I think we didn't have the local restriction, but we kind of set up a super different standard than maybe all our competition that they still have, right? Nobody really I don't see as high have as high standards as us. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like a unique standard everybody supports and everybody believes in the purpose. And that way we can partner with suppliers that also believe and we can get to that scale that we need.
I want to add from a service provider perspective, Maersk has been listening to the customers, and really now this is a must. Everybody, all the customers are demanding for sustainability efforts, for actually real targets. In 2024, Maersk became the first company to set environmental targets validated by the Science-Based Technology Target Initiative. And this just shows the commitment that service providers, despite the challenges that are faced from a cost perspective, from a society perspective, there is a commitment. And Maersk's commitment is to be net zero emissions by 2040, which for a company that moves stuff around is pretty challenging. But those actions have already shown with our investment in methanol ships. We already have 14 around the globe, and we are on that journey of ensuring that by 2030, we want to have 25% of our fleet based on low emissions. There's also on the trucking side, we are investing in electric vehicles. So yes, there is a challenge, and then there is investment, and Maersk is deciding to pay, but also the customers are demanding for that. And then on the contract logistics side, which I'm part of, on the warehousing side, we are having more and more sites that are energy efficient certified to make sure that not only we comply, but we also give the best environment to our employees and surrounding society. So plenty of examples of complexities, but commitments and real actions from the organization.
So when we met like a couple of weeks ago to talk about what are we going to talk about here, I think Steve and Rich were quite passionate about technology, data, and sustainability. And one of the reasons is looking at, we all need data to make better decisions, to decide how to avoid some of the things that are less sustainable. But on the other hand, using more data means we are using more energy, means we are creating more CO2, means we are creating more pollution. So we have kind of these types of paradox facing us. So can you guys give us some of your thoughts about this?
Well, obviously data is the new commerce, for business. And so timely, accurate data captures really is the place that, everyone starts as they're looking to create efficiency. The challenge, however, is that it's mostly redundant data. And it's privatized data, but it's mostly redundant data. There's very little, demonstrably unique data. But the burden of, I heard the prior panel talking about free shipping, which is something I'm very passionate about. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as free data. So the cost of sort of, the data acquisition, the data storage, the data manipulation, the AI, and the burden that society pays on data. And the other issue is it's mostly not great data. So I think that every piece of data must have a purpose. Must have some unique value to add, not just to your enterprise or your business, but to the world. And most of it that we consider to be proprietary isn't really, that proprietary. So I think as we move headfirst into a world where we're going to use, AI and use, decision sciences, will need to be a bit more democratic and thoughtful as how we sort of, create, store, and share that data.
Yeah, I think for us, and I'll just explain, Innovair and our holding company, Market Holdings, we support nonprofits and charities in their fundraising efforts. So we own 11 companies, and we're doing everything from front-end strategy, donor engagement, creative, the strategies to drive fundraising. And then ultimately, I'm leading global operations, where we weave together print manufacturing, sourcing, premiums, and fulfillment. For us, we run a fairly complex supply chain across 3 continents. And for us to access data as a mid-market company is a challenge. Our ability to bring that data together and make data. I had somebody very early in my career, this goes 35 years ago, that says the first person who can take data has a competitive advantage. I look at it now, all these years later, it's how do we drive insight and action out of that data? And that's what we're challenged with, is how do we manage our supply chain? How do we create visibility all the way into a donor's home, and then be able to turn that data into action to show that it's on time, and is it driving the fundraising results? So that's our challenge in trying to manage data.
Yeah, there's also a contradiction. We were talking about a paradox, or Grace mentioned a paradox. There's also something where you have to make a decision what the trade-off is. So on one hand, for example, if we look at beef is emissioning methane. Sorry, thanks. So from the environmental perspective, we need to put them in a stall, put a filter on top of it, so we have the least emissions. If we think about the perspective of animal welfare, the opposite. We want to have them on the grass feed. We want to have them on the farms, and we have this imagination of how a happy cow life looks like. So what is the trade-off? What is more important? Same thing. I was talking about the European deforestation regulation. Especially for small companies, you need to have geolocalization data if you want to bring, for example, coffee into the European Union. The thing is, like all these small fair trade farmers, they don't have the data. The only one who's having the data are the big corporates. So also there we are punishing not really punishing, but they cannot deliver, or they have to do like a lot of work to get the data, to get to fulfill all the requirements. There's the trade-off, and someone has to make the decision what we want.
And I think that you mentioned, Steve, at some point that the amount of the emissions that are being produced are comparable to aviation industry, which I think people don't really think about. But just to look at all this AI and data activities, they really can create significant environmental impact. And also, when we were just kind of chatting before, I think, Rich, you mentioned some things related to balancing ethical commitments with financial and market pressures, like looking at your work in. Yeah, so balancing ethical commitments with financial and market pressures.
Yeah, that's a great question for us, and it creates an incredible amount of tension, because when you think about working with nonprofits, I mean, every penny matters, and ultimately we have to optimize what we're doing to get as much working capital into the program. So it creates tension, because as we're pressured to drive cost down, we have to ensure high degree of ethics, right? So that's going to create a tremendous amount of transparency and conversation with our suppliers. I joined the organization 5 months ago. One of the things that I've been focused on in my short time is how do we improve the quality of that level of transparency of conversation with our supply base. We unfortunately have not had clear definition on some of these expectations. We'll get there. But in the meantime, how do we create those expectations? How do I ensure their brand protection? So the ethics element of it requires a lot of communication, and moving from what may seem like transactional relationships in our supply chain to creating truer strategic partners and having some shared expectations on what the outcome is.
I'd love to share. So Rich and I are on two sides of effectively the same coin. As Rich's organization enables fundraising for nonprofits, the supply chain project is focused on building capability, capacity, and resilience with humanitarian nonprofits. Nonprofits that are distribution intense. They distribute food, medical equipment, medical supplies, health and beauty aids, pharmaceuticals, enable wellness. And as a former head of supply chain for Walmart, former head of supply chain for Starbucks, where I ran the supply chain center of excellence there as well, I'm very familiar with the rigors of large multinational supply chains. But small independent nonprofits have a much more difficult challenge in capturing the data and managing the data and in driving compliance. I'm really excited about the panel because my opportunity is to really, have you leave here today thinking differently about the concept of what is an ethical supply chain. And so, large metascalers would have us believe, the Googles, Amazons, that ethical supply chains have as their ethos first to do no harm. And we've all heard that. First, do no harm in your business dealing, certainly, in your supply chain. The opportunity, however, as we again step into this exciting new era of AI, is to redefine ethical supply chains and say, how about we do some good? Let's be intentional about doing good, and let's move the impact of humanity from being just this essential thing that AI can't replace to the seminal issue of driving AI and teaching the AI capabilities, what it looks like to just do good, not only to not do harm, but to specifically do good. How about this? Every supply chain on the planet has about a 10 to 15% opportunity to become more efficient. And certainly the students here, the technologies, the business processes, the service providers, we're all oriented, to do that. But what if we could help a supply chain become 10% more efficient, but then ask that organization to give 1 or 2% back and make that effectively something that we could redirect for the humanitarian supply chain. So, I love this concept of what's ethical, but we want to change it from first do no harm and say, let's make it an intentional capability to do good.
Just wanted to add that to your point, on this field, it's very much driven by the right leaders and the right decisions. So I represent a big corporation, logistics provider, Maersk, and of course it feels like there is so many people all over the world. But when the commitment comes from the top and when this type of opportunities arise, it's very inspiring to be part of an organization that, despite the massive impact, is still willing to drive those, as an example, humanitarian aids. And to your point, AI should drive efficiencies. Yes, can we fill that empty space on our containers with humanitarian aids and distribute them, right? Can we use our space to hold the supplies for a situation and be a good partners for our communities? And that those things are happening, and I do feel that AI should drive these great initiatives to do good, to do better.
Yeah, so just to add, I think one of the things that really help with ethical sourcing, at least on the food industry and specifically at Chipotle, is really to look for partners that believe in the same values as you, that have the same purposes as you, right? And then another thing is really you have to put some traceability and control in place, right? It's just like, gonna sign the certificate, that's done. No, I think it's a partnership, a collaboration, right? You get out, you go to the farms, you go to their sites, right? So that really helps us to comply with the ethical sourcing.
Okay, so thank you guys. And to follow up on this, so you still mentioning how we should not just not to do harm, but focus on doing good. And so, uh, how to establish good partnerships with NGOs, with some of the other associations that can help us actually do good and do better.
Or NGOs have a wonderful role, an escalating role in a society where we're seeing, not just here in the U.S. but certainly in the U.K. and in France, people sort of retreating from what has historically been sort of a humanitarian sort of giving place. And so we believe that private industry will fill the void. Nature hates a vacuum, and wherever a vacuum exists, something will fill it. Okay. There are local, regional, and in fact, national and global, NGOs that are a great place to, really sort of engage. As we talk about efficiencies, every organization can be more efficient, but every organization has excess capacity. Okay. Some of it is underutilized capacity, and you can actually change your business processes and use more. And then after you consume the underutilized capacity, there still is that capacity that and I think I heard it on the other panel, you can't grow into. you know and so the ability to repurpose underutilized and or excess capacity is great, and it just doesn't take a lot. It's maybe you've got a fleet of trucks that's parked over the weekend, and one or two of those potentially could be utilized by someone to help kind of make deliveries. Maybe your newer team members, in addition to having a great vision and mission, can really go out and work with nonprofits to help sort of live your ethos. Okay, maybe it's some type of gifts in kind giving, or even showcasing nonprofits. But there's a lot of different things that each organizations are sort of can purposely, do to support that. And again, I would say one other thing is that spent many years building technology for large enterprise supply chain technology companies. And I'm sitting here now, 40 years later, recognizing that the technologies that we built for for-profit companies don't support, our nonprofit partners. If I was at Walmart as a head of supply chain, I had 95% supply assurance, and I only had to really think about what the on time in full. So I implemented the must arrive by date. I don't say that publicly because people don't like that, but yeah, I implemented the must arrive by date because that was a problem. On the demand side, we had 70% demand assurance and 30% potential forecast error. That's pretty good, because if you're a nonprofit, you've got 15 to 20% assurance in your supply and maybe 20 or 30% visibility to what your demand forecast is going to be. And then all the tools, the processes, and the systems that we built for for-profit companies really don't apply. Okay, so again, there's a big bucket of need there.
And Andrea, you were talking about some of the humanitarian things that Maersk is involved with.
Yeah. So going back to the partnership concept, Maersk has now a mandatory since 2024 code of conduct for all the suppliers that they need to be compliant with, and that includes ethical, environmental, labor rights, and that should go down into both the supplier, but the subcontractors and the vendors. So those are ways to demand and make sure that we're compliant all the way into indirect impacts into our society, for sure. But also, again, it's important to build a culture and know that this is a journey with our suppliers. It's not just compliance, it's a partnership. We have programs where we do capacity building, so make sure that they are informed, but we give them enough time to understand requirements, work with them to upskill them, and to, at the end, have the right mechanisms of escalations if things are not working. So this is a good practice, and I think very appropriate into what can we do to transcend the actions that we have in-house, but make sure that our chain is in in good terms.
Yeah, as I've thought about this and prepared for today, I think ultimately what it comes down to is integrity, right? We can put an ethics statement together. We can hang something on the wall that says this is what we expect. I think you got to look around the room at your team, and you got to look around the room at your leadership team, and can you say we have integrity on how we're going to execute? We've all worked for non-integrity people. I think it's the opportunity for us as leaders, as we face our supply base, as we face our teams, is to be clear in the expectation of what it means to work with Innovair. And that has to transcend itself through that relationship, and then be transparent on how we're going to measure that, and allow that to be seen. So I know with our key suppliers, those that I've been engaged with, I want them to know who I am, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it's going to be on me. And I want them to know where that lives, and it's the same thing that I expect out of my team. So to me, it's around, ultimately, we can put it on paper, we can write documents, we can sign stuff off, but are we going to lead with integrity in driving ethics into our supply chain?
So you were also talking during our meeting about de-risking your supply chain, I think, at some point, kind of looking at different aspects and working with, like we said, kind of how to work with nonprofits, but you're actually working with and for nonprofits, like a little bit different from. So I'm just saying how, unlike most other people on the panel, you're not looking at just working with nonprofits, you're working also for nonprofits. So facing some additional challenges there, as we heard from Steve, how there is a difference in forecast reliability and trying to make some predictions. So how do you see your work there?
Predictions? I can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. I was supposed to leave for Hong Kong on Sunday to work on our India supply chain, and then I didn't know we were going to wake up one day and the tariffs were going to double, and I'm like, okay, we're not going to work on India supply chain next week. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to look at some of my more esteemed colleagues here and see if they have a.
So okay, we can move to something different. Steve, you were talking also about the need to mobilize youth more, kind of in raising their awareness about issues we are facing.
Really an interesting time. I'm so excited to certainly be here at USC and see the marching band, but I'm even more excited to see the alumni that come back for this event and some of the current students, because supply chain is a superpower. If you believe supply chain is a superpower, raise your hand. Is supply chain a superpower? I believe that. For things that I believe in, I buy like GoDaddy URLs. About 10 years ago, I bought a GoDaddy URL. It says supply chain saves the world. Okay. And so y'all have got to make that happen. But the point is that, and thank you, Grace. The point is that we're standing on the edge of the future, and we find ourselves with the first digitally savvy, AI comfortable cohort of young people between the ages of 16 to 23. And I'm like on a way other side. My grandkids are older than that. So I'm on the other side of that, recognizing that as a boomer, we've not exactly left the world in the best shape. Okay. So if we can get these AI savvy, conversant young people mobilized, excited about capturing this superpower and pointing it at some of the world's issues, the humanitarian issues, corporations are going to be fine. It's the people that we're worried about, right? Then that would be amazing. So some of the things that we're doing here at the nonprofit supply chain project is really working to kind of mobilize those young people and get them out into the community, or what we say, get off the Zoom and into the room. Okay. So we're sitting here in California. We've got 8% of the US population, 40% of the homeless, and the highest concentration of homeless people in the US is right here in LA City and LA County. So back to the prior question, and certainly here, if we could get the youth engaged to go interface with the nonprofits that have, let's just say, very amazing, dedicated, but aging, not exactly tech savvy, people, then we could, I think, really put our finger on the scale in an amazing way. So just mobilizing youth overall to be oriented against supply chain, starting in high school, so they come to university understanding that they really do want to have a supply chain career, and then also be a little bit focused on the humanitarian side, because again, the corporations are gonna do okay.
Thank you. So I read recently, I shared this with you, a couple of books that look at pharmaceutical supply chains, and they scared me kind of tremendously, like China RX and The Bottle of Lies. And it just shows how difficult it can be to gain transparency in your supply chain, especially beyond the first year, kind of to see what is actually happening. Like you can look at your bottle and it can, your medicine bottle, it can say, made in EU, made in US, but the ingredients that are used to make the medicine can come from anywhere, and you may have no idea what are the conditions in these manufacturing facilities. So can some of you share some of the stories or issues in kind of looking at how to gain more transparency in your supply chains?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. Like in the beginning of our conversation, I talked a lot about the food with integrity standards, right? It goes back to the integrity and ethical sourcing. And when we think about standards and to keep them at high level, we do need to go down to the supply chain. It's not just the first tier. You do need to go to the second tier and partner the same way you do with the first tier that we face all the time. So yeah, we do have programs where we face with our second tier suppliers. We visit the farms, we visit where we raise the produce, right? Everything we connect. So we build that relationship, and it goes back to, do we have the same values? Do we believe in the same thing? And when it comes to transparency, Chipotle had been implementing RFID technology. I think we were kind of the first ones in the QSR industry to do that. So radio frequency ID in the food industry, it's kind of new. It's been a challenge, but this is providing us super nice traceability. We can kind of trace all the ingredients live, and then it really provides a good food safety control as well. So that's an example of Chipotle.
Thank you. So just one comment, the use is new. The industry is not so new. I know that technology, I used to ask my students, like, okay, how old is this this technology? And they would kind of all say, like a few years. But it was, I think, used in Second World War, kind of to identify friendly and enemy planes. So it has some history. But it's great that you guys are using it. I know there was a trend, like it seemed like they will start to use it maybe 20 years ago, but then it kind of died down. But it's good that it's coming back.
I think it works well on clothing industry, on the kind of dry stuff, right? When it comes to food, it was very challenging to put RFID on frozen. We don't use frozen ingredients, but even refrigerated was super challenging. So, and it's a high investment from all the suppliers, right? So I think that's kind of what is low down, especially on the food industry.
So can I then also ask you about your opinion on using blockchain in food industry? I know that there are companies, for instance, using it to trace coffee or similar things, but there are also issues, as was mentioned before, like if you're looking at smaller companies versus bigger companies who can invest in this, and how can we be sure then, like that the blockchain kind of device attached to a certain batch is actually the one that was tested properly and so on?
So when we think about small players and big players, right? Like we really like to grow with the small players. That's kind of our purpose, as well as we work with the big players, right? Like we try to do the hybrid in our supply chain. And really, like the small players, they do value in growing with us, right? We are adding 300 to 400 stores per year, so they do know we're gonna continue to grow with them, and that therefore they really invest, right? The big players, it's easier, right? They have more resources to invest, but especially the small players, they're definitely on the journey with us.
Okay, so I think we covered kind of more or less the questions that I had in mind, and I just realized a few minutes ago that we actually do have a clock, which is down here that I can use, and we have 1 minute left on the clock, so we have time to get a question or two from the audience. But okay, there is one.
Was this question for me? Was it for me? I don't know. I can. Anybody? Okay. Yeah. Well, I can answer if you want to jump in. So yeah, we work very close with our suppliers, especially on cost efficiencies, right? So I think that there is this program that we developed, Spend Smarter. Well, how can we partner together to find collaboration and efficiencies together? Because sometimes we are creating efficiencies to the supply chain, right, as a customer. So we are always like, I think about farm to fork, right, which is the raw material all the way to our restaurants. Every single step of the way, how can we collaborate to generate more an efficient process?
I would just add something.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the amount of suppliers. If we talk about Walmart or like my previous employer, they have, I don't know, 100,000 suppliers, and then it's difficult to help over a certain level. So of course you can give like some handouts or some information to get better, but you have not the time and the resources to help each and every supplier.
We're in the process of onboarding a new supplier in Mexico. We made the commitment of putting people down there for 3 weeks, almost a month, to set standards and set expectations, not just getting what we need to get out the door on time, but to understand our philosophy and how we work. So it was important for us. And it's a commitment of asking your team to live in Tijuana for 3.5 weeks.
I would respond and say it's the hallmark of a world-class brand to ensure that if an employee comes to work and sacrifices other opportunities, they should leave better. And if a supplier joins your supply chain, as the brand, you have an obligation to make them better. Okay. 30 years ago at Walmart, I implemented something called merchandising logistics. We identified 55 decisions a buyer would make if a buyer was a supply chain. And we deployed people to go to those suppliers, all of them, to work specifically to upskill that capability. At Starbucks, we didn't buy coffee from large cooperatives. We bought them from small families that maybe have a hectare of just the premium beans. And we were on the ground with that family with agronomy studies, making sure their kids would go to college, that there was, some succession there, and that they were successful. So I think the art and science of supply chain is ensuring that your first and second tier suppliers are healthy and not just compliant or vetted, but are enabled and better because they're sort of a part of your ecosystem.
So thank you all again for being here until the end, and please give a round of applause to this great panel. So you made it to the end of the first day. Now the bar is downstairs, so if you need something to help you kind of relax, you can go there. And tomorrow, I'm sure, will be another great day. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Grace and panel. Wow, what a first day, huh? I mean, some incredible panelists, keynote speakers. I mean, a lot of information, really good stuff, too. Okay, so it is networking time. So there's going to be a room full of hundreds of students dying to meet all of you. It's downstairs. So if you went down the stairs, it's essentially going to be over here, downstairs. It's called the Pike Ballroom. There are signs. But anyway, enjoy, go meet students, fellow alumni, and have a good time. And we'll see you tomorrow morning.